Dylan Mercer was the kind of 27-year-old you stop noticing after a while. He wore the same gray work hoodie most days, drove a sun-faded Civic with one mismatched door, and kept his head down. He lived with his mother, Evelyn, in a small ranch house on a quiet block in Aurora, Illinois. Chain-link fences, boxy mailboxes, cracked sidewalks patched by the city after winters that felt longer every year. Neighbors knew him as polite, quiet, and always in a hurry. If you asked where he was headed, he'd say, "Second shift," and leave it there. 2 bad seconds. That's all it was. He moved to pass her, and his elbow clipped her forearm. The notice fluttered. She stumbled backward, heels slipping on the damp tile she'd mopped an hour before. The back of her head struck the edge of the low counter with a sound Dylan would hear in his sleep for weeks. The hollow wooden knock of a fruit bowl sliding, the soft thud of her body. He froze, then fell to his knees. Mom. Mom. He cupped her face. Her eyes were open and unfocused. He said her name again and again until it wasn't a name anymore, but a sound. He called 911. His thumb hovered over the green button. He looked at the back door, at the baseboards, at the broom against the fridge, at the time of day, at everything but the blood he was trying not to see as blood, because there wasn't much of it, just a tiny crescent near the counter. And then he told himself she was breathing, which he couldn't confirm. He pressed his ear to her chest and thought he heard something. He told himself if he waited 30 seconds, she'd blink. He counted to 30, twice, and nothing changed. He tried chest compressions the way he remembered from high school. Too hard, then too soft, then stopping because panic is a shoreline that keeps pulling you under. When he finally stood up, he was aware of the neighbor's dog barking next door, the way the rain ticked against the sliding glass door, the smallest sounds getting very large in his head. In the worst moment of his life, he had the worst thought. I can't let them think I did this on purpose. He imagined a news van. He imagined handcuffs flashing under porch lights. He imagined the word murderer attached to his mother's name when what happened felt like a terrible, stupid, ordinary accident, the kind that ruins a family forever. He wasn't a bad son. People close to him would insist on that. He was the show-up son, the one who mowed the lawn, took his mom to appointments, fixed the leaky trap under the sink, with a YouTube video playing on his phone. He worked at nights loading pallets at a grocery warehouse off the interstate and tried to finish HVAC coursework at a community college on the days he didn't crash from exhaustion. His mother called him my steady one. When he slipped cash into the top drawer of her dresser to help with utilities, she pretended not to notice, then later folded the same amount into his lunch cooler with a post-it that said, "You are not alone." Most houses hold 2 or 3 arguments that repeat themselves with different words. In theirs, one was money. In early March, the property tax bill arrived. It was heavier than usual. The car insurance reminder followed. Then the pharmacy called about Evelyn's blood pressure meds being on back order, and it all stacked up in the space between their breaths. Dylan was missing a shift here and there. The overtime he'd been counting on evaporated with a scheduling change. He kept telling himself he'd catch up. The day everything broke started as nothing special. Gray sky, spitting rain, the house smelling faintly of coffee and pine sol because Evelyn had been cleaning the hallway baseboards on her knees. Dylan came home from the warehouse bone-tired, damp from a loading dock spill, with the kind of headache that sits behind one eye. He dropped his keys and heard his mother's voice carry from the kitchen. "We got the red notice. The city's tacking on a late fee." She always tried to keep the fear out of her voice when she said we. He loved her for that and hated it too. He should have said, "I've got it." Instead, he muttered, "They always do this," and kept walking. She followed, paper in hand. "We can't pretend this away, Dylan." Something about that line tugged at a wire inside him. He turned too fast from the hallway toward the kitchen, words piling up without air. "I know, Mom. I said I know." His voice was louder than he meant. The rain scratched at the window, Evelyn took a half step back, still holding the notice, and tried to put a gentle hand on his shoulder to slow everything down. 2 bad seconds. That's all it was. He moved to pass her, and his elbow clipped her forearm. The notice fluttered. She stumbled backward, heel slipping on the damp tiles she'd mopped an hour before. The back of her head struck the edge of the low counter with a sound Dylan would hear in his sleep for weeks. The hollow wooden knock of a fruit bowl sliding, the soft thud of her body. He froze, then fell to his knees. "Mom! Mom!" He cupped her face. Her eyes were open and unfocused. He said her name again and again until it wasn't a name anymore, but a sound. He called 911. His thumb hovered over the green button. He looked at the back door, at the baseboards, at the broom against the fridge, at the time of day, at everything but the blood he was trying not to see as blood, because there wasn't much of it. Just a tiny crescent near the counter. And then he told himself she was breathing, which he couldn't confirm. He pressed his ear to her chest and thought he heard something. He told himself if he waited 30 seconds, she'd blink. He counted to 30 twice, and nothing changed. He tried chest compressions the way he remembered from high school. Too hard, then too soft, then stopping because panic is a shoreline that keeps pulling you under. When he finally stood up, he was aware of the neighbor's dog barking next door, the way the rain ticked against the sliding glass door, the smallest sounds getting very large in his head. In the worst moment of his life, he had the worst thought. I can't let them think I did this on purpose. He imagined a news van. He imagined handcuffs flashing under porch lights. He imagined the word murderer attached to his mother's name when what happened felt like a terrible, stupid, ordinary accident, the kind that ruins a family forever. He carried her, whispering, "I'm sorry," into her hair, so softly it sounded like breathing. He laid her on a tarp he'd used to haul yard waste the previous fall. He didn't register that doing this was already a different kind of crime, building its own story around the accident. He slid the back door open and let the cold air slap his face. In the backyard, the grass gave way to a rectangle of soil he'd turned last year for tomatoes. His hands found the shovel in the shed by instinct. The ground was heavier than he expected for March. Every shovelful stuck like clay. The rain turned the soil to paste, smeared on his knuckles. He worked until he couldn't feel his forearms, until the hole was more a wound than a plan. He placed her in gently, like you set down something breakable, and covered her with the same care, whispering apologies that caught in his chest and came out strangled. He tamped the surface with the flat of the shovel, then scattered last year's mulch, dragging a bag of Scots across the lawn like it might cover what he'd done. He planted the leftover stakes from the tomatoes, thinking, ridiculously, that it would look less disturbed. He went back inside and scrubbed the kitchen floor until the smell of bleach burned his eyes. At dusk, he typed a text on his mother's phone and left it unsent. "I'm staying with a friend for a few days, don't worry." He deleted it. He tried another. "Going to Aunt Marie's." He deleted that too. He set her phone on the table and stared at the wall clock, listening to it mark fresh odds against him. When the neighbor's porch light clicked on, he flinched. In the mirror above the sink, he didn't recognize the person staring back. People talk about fight or flight. They don't talk enough about freeze. He slept on the couch without sleeping, shoes on, hoodie pulled up, the house loud with quiet. In the morning, he drove to work like a ghost and lifted boxes he didn't feel, then clocked out early with a phantom headache and drove home under a sky the color of dishwater. That night, he put his mother's favorite mug back on the counter because the empty spot looked like a missing tooth. He woke at 3 a.m., walked to the sliding door, and stared at the square of darker earth until dawn. The second argument in a house like theirs was always about telling the truth. He had already chosen the third, fear, the kind that turns even good sons into someone they won't recognize. By Saturday, the absence began to have a shape. Evelyn's friend from church, Mrs. Alvarez, texted to ask if she was still bringing the lemon bars to Sunday coffee hour. No response. Her sister Marie called twice and left a voicemail with the worried music most people reserve for hospitals. "Evie, call me, please." The neighbor's shepherd barked toward the fence as if announcing something no one knew how to hear. Dylan told himself he had a plan. Plans feel like safety when you don't have any. He would say his mother went to stay with Aunt Marie for a few days to help with a kitchen remodel. He would say she left early, took the train, didn't want to disturb anyone. He typed that into a text to Mrs. Alvarez and hit send before he could think better. Her dots appeared, then disappeared. Finally, "Tell her we miss her." He replied with a thumbs up and then immediately wanted to crawl out of his own skin. On Sunday, he didn't go to church. He watered the patch of backyard in a steady circle, the hose heavy in his hand. He turned the soil with a garden fork to let it breathe, which was only something he told himself because the surface was settling. He sprinkled more mulch. He planted 2 cheap flats of pansies he bought at a hardware store, telling the cashier it was for his mother to pretty up the yard early. "That's sweet," the woman said, and he choked on the word. On Monday, Aunt Marie showed up at the front door. The kitchen remodel had started months ago. There was no trip planned. "Where's your mom?" she asked as soon as he opened the door. She looked past him like the truth might be taped to the fridge. Dylan felt something inside him lurch, then steady. "She had a headache," he lied. "She wanted to rest. Maybe turn off her phone for a day." Aunt Marie pursed her lips and looked at the hallway baseboards, newly clean and gleaming. She'd once told Evelyn that Dylan was the kind of son you could count on when life was falling apart. She wanted to believe that now. She kissed his cheek and said, "Tell her I love her," then went back to her car slowly. The missing persons report came in Tuesday morning, filed by Marie after 2 days of silence and the wrong kind of answers. 2 patrol officers in dark blue knocked just after lunch. Dylan didn't run. He always thought running was what guilty people did. He stepped onto the porch and answered questions with the wary politeness of someone accustomed to being on the edge of trouble, but not inside it. "When did you last see your mother?" "Saturday morning." "Did she leave with anyone?" "No." "Did she take a bag?" "I think so." He couldn't specify. That's when one of the officers asked, "Mind if we take a quick look inside?" His throat clicked. "Sure," he said, because saying no felt like the truest confession of all. They walked through the living room, the tidy kitchen, the dim hallway with the framed school pictures. Nothing screamed. Nothing told the right story either. An officer paused at the sliding glass door, as if drawn by the view of the backyard, square of turned earth now dotted with pansies under a sagging sky. "Doing some early planting?" he asked like small talk. Dylan nodded. "Tomatoes," he said, absurdly, then added, "Later." They didn't go outside. They didn't have cause. They handed him a card with a detective's name and asked him to call if his mother checked in. He promised he would. He watched their cruiser roll away and had to sit down on the edge of the front step before he fell. That night, he sent a text from his mother's phone to Aunt Marie. "Staying with a friend. Need a break. Love you." The 3 dots appeared and stayed, then vanished. His shame came in waves, followed by a kind of numbness that felt like mercy until it didn't. He put the phone back in her purse and placed the purse under her bed. He lay down on the floor beside it, face turned to the dust line where the vacuum didn't reach, and he cried into his sleeve like a child. Detective Serena Collins called Wednesday. Her voice lived in that register between gentle and steel. "We're just trying to make sure she's safe," she said. "Any place she'd go if she needed a few days?" Dylan said the name of a friend from church he'd heard his mom mention. The detective said they'd already called her. Nothing. "Would you mind coming down to the station to talk?" Collins asked. He said he could on Friday. He was working nights and needed to sleep. She let that go. Before she hung up, she said, almost like a benediction, "It's always better if the family stays close." Thursday, a neighbor's Ring camera video was shared to the block's group chat, then trickled outward like water finding the lowest place. It showed a blurry figure in a hoodie moving from the back door to the yard at 2:13 a.m. on Saturday, carrying something awkward, dragging something dark. People watched it on their kitchen counters with their coffee mugs half raised. People made faces and didn't say the words they were thinking. Someone sent it to the police. Someone slid a printed screenshot into Dylan's mailbox without a note, like a mirror he hadn't asked for. The square of earth in the backyard became an organism. He couldn't stop tending it with the nervous motions of someone straightening a picture on the wall again and again. He started to hear sounds that were just memory replaying. His mother shifting in her chair, the click of her mug on the counter, the laugh she never liked because it sounded too loud in a small room. He dreamed she was cold and he'd forgotten the blanket. He woke wet-faced and walked to the sliding door to touch his palm to the glass, as if glass could conduct warmth. Friday morning he stood in the shower and let the water run until the steam erased the mirror. He was supposed to meet Detective Collins at 2. He had thought he could keep weaving the same thin cord of lies until it reached something sturdy. He couldn't. The images in his head wouldn't let him eat, and the lies in his mouth wouldn't let him breathe. He put on clean jeans and a jacket and grabbed his keys. He drove past the station twice like a man circling a pool to check the depth. The third time, he turned in. Inside, the air smelled like coffee and copier toner. A civilian clerk looked up. "Can I help you?" Dylan's throat worked once, then again. He set his keys on the counter so his hands would stop shaking. "I need to report something," he said. The words came slow, like they'd been kept in a cold room. I killed my mom." The clerk blinked, then looked to an officer nearby. Dylan kept talking as if to hold himself upright with the sound. "It was an accident. I swear. It was an accident. I buried her in the backyard." He said the address. He said it twice so there wouldn't be any mistake. The officer guided him to a small room off the lobby and shut the door gently. "Take a seat," the officer said. Dylan sat and put his face in his hands and didn't lift it for a long time. When he did, Detective Collins was there, measured and human. "Dylan," she said, "we're going to do this the right way." He nodded and kept nodding, full of the first relief and the worst dread a person can hold at once. They read him his rights and he signed. There was no rush in Detective Collins' voice, only clarity. "Tell me what happened," she said, a small recorder on the table filling with the slow sound of a life cracking open. Dylan told it straight. The notice, the wet tile, the short fuse he hadn't meant to light, the 2 bad seconds, the sound of his mother's head against the counter, the way time behaved like a rubber band after. He didn't stop at the accident. He told the part he was most ashamed of, the tarp, the shovel, the hole, because leaving those out would be another lie, and he'd run out of room for lies. While he spoke, officers moved quietly at his address with a warrant. They secured the yard. They set a pale blue tent where the ground changed color. The block fills slowly with the kind of silence that is only broken by the whine of generators and the murmur of radios. Mrs. Alvarez stood on her porch with her hand over her mouth like a prayer. Aunt Marie parked 3 houses down and could not bring herself to step out of the car. A man in a suit from the state's attorney's office arrived and did not look at the neighbors. A forensic tech knelt, brushed away soil with a soft paintbrush, and let the story in the ground come back up into the light. At the station, Dylan asked once if he could call Aunt Marie. Detective Collins said yes, but suggested they wait until he'd finished. He nodded, and in a voice that kept catching, he told her about the days after, the texts he'd sent pretending to be his mother, the watering of the soil, the pansies, the way he kept trying to make the surface behave when the underneath was not okay. "I just kept thinking I could fix it if I stayed ahead of it," he said. "I wasn't ahead of anything." An EMT at the scene in the backyard looked away for a second, which was his way of honoring the bare human fact of the moment. The medical examiner's team worked without hurry. When they lifted what needed lifting, someone from the department, someone who had a mother of her own, took a second to adjust a corner of the tarp as if tucking in a sheet. No one said this out loud, but the movement meant this was a person who was loved. Back in the interview room, Collins asked, "When did you decide to come in today?" Dylan said he had decided 100 times and not done it. "I saw myself on that camera," he added, surprising her. "Not literally, just the idea of it. I couldn't carry it anymore." He paused, scrubbed his face with both hands. "She raised me better than to leave her alone," he said, and then his voice broke on the word alone. The autopsy later identified the cause of death as blunt force trauma consistent with a fall. Toxicology was negative. There were no defensive wounds, no fractures on the forearms or hands. The ME noted a small contusion behind the right ear, and the kind of internal bleeding that, untreated, can take a life faster than a person expects. These findings would matter for lawyers and statutes in words like intent and culpable mental state. They didn't matter much to the part of the story that counted most to Dylan, which was that his mother was gone and he hadn't let himself do the one decent thing immediately: tell the truth. Neighbors watched the tent in the backyard as if the structure itself might deliver wisdom. Some whispered about anger, his, theirs, the world's. Others reached for softer explanations because the harder one felt like standing on a frozen lake, listening to the ice complain. "He was always so polite," someone said 3 times, as if politeness should insulate a person from tragedy. "He took care of that yard," someone else added, looking at the square where the pansies lay uprooted next to the scene tape. When they led Dylan from the interview room for booking, he did not resist. He didn't ask to wash his face. He asked only if someone could tell Aunt Marie that he was at the station and that he was sorry. Detective Collins said she would. He nodded in that weary way of men who have been holding a load for too long. In the small window before the door swung closed, he saw a slice of the lobby, the daylight outside thin and pale. He thought of the sliding glass door at home and the way the morning used to land on the kitchen table like a modest blessing. There was no courtroom that afternoon, no judge in black robes, no wood benches, no gavel. Paperwork moved forward. A charge sheet took on ink. The law does not require a courtroom for a person to feel the weight of it pressing evenly across their shoulders. In an interview recorded after processing, Dylan said twice that he wanted the world to know it was an accident, and 4 times that he knew he had made everything worse by hiding it. He didn't say the word forgiveness. He didn't ask for it. He looked down at his hands and said, "I should have called. I should have called." In the weeks that followed, Evelyn's church held a small vigil on a mild evening when the first real spring air moved through town. There were lemon bars on folding tables because ritual often looks like dessert when people don't know what else to do. Someone sang a hymn too high for their range, and no one minded. Aunt Marie spoke last, voice steadier than anyone expected. "My sister loved her boy," she said, and you could hear the hyphen between loved and boy, the complicated bond that resists straight lines. "And love doesn't vanish because a terrible thing happened. It doesn't excuse, it doesn't erase, but it doesn't vanish." Several people cried then, not because they knew what justice should look like, but because they recognized the truth in the shape of what she said. Detective Collins kept the ring screenshot in the case file, not because it proved the whole story, it didn't, but because it captured something that words never fully do. A figure in a hoodie moving through the dark, the human outline carrying more than it can carry, choosing a bad path because fear had narrowed the road. In her notes, she wrote, "Accident began the story. Fear carried it forward. Conscience ended it." She didn't usually write like that. This time she did. If there is a lesson worth carrying from a story like this, and not all stories offer one, it might be smaller than people want. It might be that truth told late arrives as a different thing than truth told right away, but it still matters that it arrives. It might be that good sons can do unforgivable things and still be the people their mothers raised, at least in the part of them that walks into a station and says the hardest sentence a person can say. It might be that the smallest choices, cleaning baseboards, making coffee, arguing, turning too fast on a wet floor, are the tight weave of ordinary days, and that in those days is where our lives are most breakable and most real. In the backyard of the small ranch on the quiet block, the ground was repaired, reseeded, then left to do what ground does, take things in and make them part of the place. New grass grew over the rectangle by summer. If you were walking past and didn't know, you wouldn't pause. Most people didn't. But sometimes in the late afternoon light that slants just so in July, the yard looked like a book someone had closed gently, a story still inside it, a story that will always weigh what it weighs.